That's three words.
Well, if you feel the need.
We can give them two.
That are sourcing the product, and how can we incentivize them to act more, sustainable? But this is basically only the second topic. On the other hand side, I think people here are willing to pay more. I'm pretty sure that each and every one in this room has probably at least one or two bio or fair trade kind of product at home in the fridge, right? But why do we really do that? Are we sure? Do we know what that means? Who in here can explain to me what a bio seal here in Germany actually means? Excellent. Very well. And you raised the average, I'm pretty sure. But that is how we actually consume these goods. Exactly. So this is. That is perfectly true, and I think there's a valuable approach in this. But at this point in time, we are consuming these goods solely for the sake of our own, for feeling good about how we consume, which is fine on the one hand side. But I think sustainable way of consuming has to take a different route, and we have to generate a real interest in the people who are sourcing these products. I know there was a huge crowd here in Germany a couple of years back when people realized how companies such as Adidas produce their products in countries such as Bangladesh, for instance. Have you heard anything about this in the recent past? Not really, right?
H&M is, for example, H&M is having some sort of cheap labor in Bangladesh.
And the point that I'm trying to make is, this situation hasn't really changed at all. Regardless if it's clothing or even electronic products, this situation is still more or less unchanged, simply because the supply chain is too complex for the additional amount that people in the consuming countries are willing to pay to actually reach the people who are producing these goods. And this is, I think, one of the topics that we need to understand, the impact that our consumer behavior really has. It's not that simple just to buy a fair trade product and then trust that everything is going to be alright. It's not that simple, I think. So education is an absolutely important topic that we need to address, and do that in an emotional way. Because quite frankly speaking, if somebody tells me you need to change your behavior and not drive your car because otherwise shit's going to hit the fan in a couple of years, that's about as appealing as somebody telling me what I need to eat to not actually get diabetes. I might listen to that, but there's no emotional connection, so I think it's absolutely important that we educate and do that through a channel that touches people on an emotional level.
Sorry, I don't completely agree with this. I don't think that it's only about educating people, and it's only that mostly the developing countries have, let's say they don't have the basics or so on. I think it's more the mindset that we always think in a more, I think it's more the mindset that we think in a more individualistic manner, that what is important for me. And I think it has to do something with the capitalistic society that we live in. I'm from India, and if I trace back like 200 years ago, we didn't have these problems. We still don't have this concept of supermarkets where you are loaded with food which comes in cans or, plastic. And we are still maybe far behind many countries in terms of education. So I don't think it's really, education. I think it's more about the mindset. Like, you need to think about everybody and not just yourself, that what is important for me, like this selfish mindset.
I might have chosen the wrong words here. Not education in terms of educating the countries where the products come from, but educating people here in the consuming countries what impact our consumer behavior actually has. I think that is the relevant aspect.
I think developed countries have the major role to play, because, you have the money, you have the education, so you have to help the developing world. I think from my point of view, capitalism is the biggest problem that was against sustainability. Sorry to take it.
You're right.
So on that note, I'd actually like to ask Hila, how can we increase the global reach of these sustainable initiatives? Because clearly there are initiatives here, but how can we take them throughout the rest of the world?
Okay.
I think scaling is a challenge that I had this like aha moment in Munich a few weeks ago. One Sunday, I come back from the gym, and suddenly I see all these scooters spread out around Munich, just like in a couple of hours. Yeah. Okay, no problem. So I see suddenly, I didn't know this, but suddenly scooters were legal in Munich and in Germany, and they were just spread out everywhere. 3 companies, Lime, I don't know, all the other brands, all over the cities in a matter of hours. Like it was just, and that's scaling of an innovation. Someone like wanted to bring in scooters into Europe. They got the license. There, all the scooters were around the city. That's scaling of an innovation because you have a lot of that product available to the user. Where we operate, it's not as easy to scale. And I think that's a challenge. Where we operate, there's difference in infrastructure, there's different languages, there's different adoption rates of diverse products, whether it's a mobile solution, whether it's a innovation for smallholder farmers. The realities where our users operate are very, very different. So I think scaling in the realities where we operate it comes with complexities, and you need to be aware of them, and you need to plan for them and not assume that if it's adopted in one country in Africa, it will be adopted in another country in Africa. I think there's an assumption also sometimes that it's one country, and I think I think that sensitivity and that empathy of the realities of where you operate has to be ongoing, and I think you have to show, in any case, to scale, you need to show results, and I think that is something that sometimes we see that startups that have, let's say, a goal of doing good, don't think that they need to think like with results. They might assume that the fact that they're doing good is enough. But I think if they want, and this relates to the financing, I think not everyone that does good has that access to finance all the time. I think Robert's case is very admirable. Yet a lot of startups trying to do good do face challenges with funding. The investors sometimes want ROI, a return on investment, and sometimes doing good is not enough ROI. So I think it's also my key tip for startups thinking about scale. First, show results, basic results, show that you're solving a problem, showing that you're addressing diverse user assumptions that you have, and then you can think about scaling. But also plan your scaling, because it's not like scooters in Munich.
Anyone wants to jump in on that? Otherwise, yes.
But I think we have to also be careful with scaling. Like, I definitely agree. I think many people were agreeing about a lot of the problem is the capitalism system, that it's all about power and just keep making more and more money, consume more and more and more and more, and a lot of the scaling goes through that. And I think I'm not going to talk about my artistic part. I want to talk about Solar for Schools. I recently joined, and for me it was very, very, very important that I would not join a company to give my time, my effort, my passion, my knowledge, my energy into something that is not giving a practical solution and has a correct mindset to shape a sustainable future. So with Solar for Schools, what I found a good way, and we're working on it to make it scalable, if you can explain it better, Robert, is through partnerships. I mean, many companies go and think like, oh, I am going to do it, and I'm going to go conquer the entire world, and then we have all these American companies all over, and they're not particularly sustainable. And what I'm seeing now where we're heading is like we want to go and have help as many schools as possible in many countries, but partnership, it's a big, big key in collaboration that could probably go against what you were saying, capitalism, which is all about let's be selfish and greedy and make money and power.
So before we go on to the Q&A, which will be happening very soon, I'd like to pose an open question to the whole panel. You can choose to answer it if you have the question, if you have the answer. Let's talk about then ROI. Let's talk about metrics and indicators. Do you measure within your company or organization in any way innovation, sustainability, and sustainable innovation. And if you do, which are the indicators that you are using to measure that? Or what are your indicators for success, if you have them? I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it.
One of the challenges we have is every time we come up with KPIs one quarter, and then we change so much about the following quarter that they're irrelevant. So it's a slight challenge there. Innovation too quick, it's very difficult to then have metrics. But maybe that's just my excuse of being disorganized.
Anyone else wants to jump in on that? Yes.
When we started our accelerator 4 years ago, I can tell you that we were trying to understand what is the secret sauce for success for a startup to join our program. And I think you learn along the way that those things change, but today we have, I think, 4 or 5 key indicators to check if a team would be relevant for a program. So actually, indicator number 1 is the team. I think a lot, it's the idea is important. That's one indicator. How innovative is it? How sustainable is it? Like, what's the business model behind it? But the 4th and one of the most important indicators is the team. There were a lot of Facebooks before Facebook actually existed. It wasn't the first social network, but it's the one that was able to scale. And sometimes it's the team behind it. And I think that is something that we really want to see, is what the team brings, what is their past experiences, what is the traction that they've had with their solution. And I think you want to also see what is the complementary elements that the team itself has. But so I mentioned 4 things that we look at.
Yeah, so we have been placing a lot of attention on the individuals making decisions and contributing to sustainability. But when we are talking about return of investment and all these financial aspects, we have to consider how we price things as well as a society. So if we are pricing very cheap, unsustainable solutions or technologies or whatever, then we are incentivizing people to consume that and to take that decision. And then it is very important to have like a social agreement where we say, okay, we are willing to change this. We are willing to price things the real price, because basically we're not paying, when we pay for fuel, then we're not paying for all the problems it is causing. We're just paying for the value chain, current value chain of fuel. If we will price that as it should be priced, then suddenly, I don't know, renewable energies are the way to go, for example. And then that's also something to take into account when we are talking about prices and investment and so on, is how markets are designed, how we are pricing things, what are our priorities as a society. And I think that's how we can summarize that. What are our priorities, what is important for us as a society, and how are we tackling these challenges, because the problems we're facing are very big.
I think the way that many of us think about success is money, how much money I made. Or how to measure innovation, well, how much money I made out of that. For me, in an artistic way, it's hard for me to know who I really truly inspired from the audience. We can talk and I can feel the audience, but at the end I don't know how much. I hope it's a lot, but for me it's actually the team I'm working with. The actors. I recently performed a short play written and directed by me. And for me, the most amazing thing was that my 2 actors, they didn't know much about sustainability and the environment, and in order to be part of it, they need to be educated about it. So I'm also doing it to them. And at least I'm very sure that 1 out of 2 really got super inspired to the point it's like, oh my gosh, I'm drinking coffee with my plastic Cab, this is so bad, I'm going to go buy a reusable one. Kathy, I didn't eat all that meat for lunch for the past 2 weeks, and it's like really into it. I'm like, yes, one more person that is inspired and changing.
50% is quite a good 50% is good. So we're going to move now to the Q&A. My colleague will go. Did you want to say something? You did. Please do. Yes, of course.
I find the question you just asked about how you can actually quantify the whole innovation and sustainability process. This is a quite interesting question to ask, because quite often it turns out if you throw in topics like an ROI too early in the process of coming up with a new idea, you kill it from the very beginning. I have we are working a lot of times in major events, mainly in the Munich area. So we have coffee bars sitting in events like the Bits and Pretzels or the DLD and so on, which is an incredibly, a great environment full of buzzwords if you're into that. But it's also a great environment for people who are incredibly intrinsically driven and emotionally driven. And we do have the privilege that we get in touch with people who have an idea. And I'm more than happy to provide a platform for people to try out their idea out of their own motivation. So the question that we're asking when somebody comes up with an idea, if we should do it or not, is not so much, okay, what is the direct return on invest? If it as a whole sounds reasonable, and if it has a sustainable goal behind it that I can identify with, I'm more than happy just to give it a try and see if it actually finds an audience, because I think this is one of the major topics that we see with startups in the sector. They neglect the fact that they will need to find somebody who actually buys into this. So I think this is the earliest stage at which we should start to evaluate the overall idea and see if it makes sense from an economical perspective or not.
Not kill it at the start,
Yes.
basically. So if we're ready to move on to the Q&A, my colleague will pass this microphone. Yes. You can direct your question to one of the panelists or to the whole panel. That's also fair. Anyone wants to participate? Otherwise, I can keep on asking questions.
I'd like to ask the audience a question if no one wants to ask.
I like having seven later.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. It's a question for you. How do you educate people in green finance? Or is it a topic at school?
I'm not too sure what you mean by that. What do you mean by not doing it? So what do you mean?
Yeah, like sustainable assets, because most people invest in things they don't know, because the money is just on the bank account, and they don't think about what the bank is doing with the money.
Okay, so in schools we don't really talk about that.
Okay.
So far not. Maybe we should. Good point. The way we raise the money is through bonds. The bonds are raised through typically a platform in the UK called Ethics, which basically promotes sustainable investments. And then the major features of investing in a school, we feature that quite heavily. It's basically the education piece, it's the fact it's a relatively stable return, the fact that it's helping schools, and when we then get a bit of feedback from our investors, who, by the way, nearly over 50% women, which is unusual for most investment products, is that they are not really doing it for the 5%. 5% is okay, looks like, why not? But it's the fact that they feel good about what they're doing, and they like the newsletter of the schools that are taking place, and they'd like to feel part of that. So I think we see our role more as providing an alternative investment class, I mean we're still very small, that enables people to put their money to good use, rather than trying to educate people to do that. But having said that, yes, you should all move to green bank. No, actually, you think I'm joking, but actually it can make a big difference. And some banks begin to take this very seriously. Commerzbank wanted to talk to me about setting up a fund. I used to be a VC, sorry.
It's hard working with him.
Yeah. They basically begin to think about how the risk around the fact that their money is tied up in non-sustainable assets, and at what point will the public backlash against that, and then they'll lose customer base. So one of the fastest ways to get your banks to invest in the right things is to start voting with your feet and moving to banks like Triodos or the Green Bank, whatever. So that is something you could do, and that is something actually we could do in schools too. We could encourage students to encourage their parents to move. Not something we've done, so thanks for the idea.
Probably I should ask the first question. The bar is so high. But I wanted to ask a question to you. You mentioned that you have like 50,000 people in your organization.
15,000
15. Okay.
colleagues around the world.
Yeah, so it's already quite a huge number, right? How do you communicate between, inside your organization? Usually, in my opinion at least, every time I talk to a new person about sustainability, the feedback that I get from one person and their opinions are usually extremely diverse. How do you bring the people to a common point?
So let me be open. I think we have a challenge like that any corporate would have. I think we are one of the biggest humanitarian actors in the world. I think it's, let's say, relatively to, I don't know, Procter & Gamble, I'm assuming we're much smaller. But I think, let's not assume that everyone likes innovation. I think it would be very pretentious from someone working in an innovation accelerator to assume that everyone likes innovation. Innovation doesn't solve all the problems. Innovation is relevant in some cases. I think usually, I assume in our organization, as we are a UN agency, there's a bit more knowledge about sustainability, a bit more awareness. But it's still, if I look at the innovation question, you'll have early adopters like you have with any innovation or people working in a big corporate, because also people working in a big organization also like to work in big organizations because it fits their personality, right? So not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. Maybe some people are meant to be entrepreneurs, and you just need to make sure that you are creating a message that is relevant and that is relatable. I think you need to, and I think it's very different from organization to organization. What is right for the World Food Program in the way that we do innovation might not be relevant for another organization. And I think you need to be very connected to your organization where you work in, know the realities, the challenges that people have, because otherwise if you come and say, oh, innovation is the best thing, you won't get buy-in. So you have to have that ongoing sensitivity and connection to the people that you work with and the realities that they deal with on a daily basis.
Was it the answer to your question? I didn't have the feeling that was the answer.
So my take out of that was like, it has to be an individual effort as well to be aware of what your organization is working on, so that you are actually aware what the organization is driving towards innovation, and I think it's supposed to be a little bit towards self-education there as well.
I think the question is pretty complex in a very big organization like yours.
Yeah.
To really unify all these efforts and to make the mindset.
So we do, I can just mention, we do a number of activities, let's say, to encourage innovation. We do, for example, a yearly innovation challenge for within our organization. So colleagues around the world can apply with an idea that they have that's new, that's early stage, or that they've implemented and maybe haven't worked with us via the accelerator. Because there could be innovation happening in the organization that hasn't happened through us, and we're aware of it, and I think we should celebrate it. We also give an annual award in our organization. There's this meeting that happens that happens once a year, and specific country office can get acknowledged, and they get an award. They get a statue. They don't get money from us for that. That award, even though it's a statue, very appreciated because it's a sense of pride for one of our 80 offices around the world. We also, teams that are relevant can also come, like that go through a specific application process, can come to our boot camps or get funding to implement their innovation. So I think, again, from my experience as someone who's worked in the organization before I was part of the accelerator, I think it's really about creating innovation that's relevant for your organization. So what I mentioned, the examples that I shared from our organization are relevant for WFP. Again, I think it just depends what this might be a good idea for another organization, and it might not.
Much more precise, and that's you need to be intellectually much more rigorous in your comparisons. And this is not just you. I mean, all of us need to be much more rigorous. Yeah, driving an SUV is a bad idea. Driving a car is a bad idea. Are we all going to stop driving cars completely? Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for society to suddenly go, no cars from tomorrow. It's not going to happen. Yeah, let's be realistic. What can we do to improve that? Let's all share electric cars. Electric cars are more expensive. They have a higher CO2 footprint to make them, so we have to share them. Otherwise, it makes no sense. That's a halfway house. Going from cars to no cars we're never going to convince the whale to do it.
And I
So we have
think
to be
this
realistic.
is where the problem comes in, where too simplistic solutions are being brought in the front line.
Yeah.
And then this is where manipulation starts,
Yeah.
where you start with wrong argumentation. People follow because, yes, sustainability, but maybe this one sentence may be too simple
Yeah.
and too easy and too generic. And thank you for this input. Yeah, this
The
makes
problem
me
with Twitter and
really
social media
mind-blowing. Thank
is you
you.
can only have sound bites. And
This is the
this is
point.
too complicated for sound bites. Sorry, I got a bit passionate there.
It's okay. We're going to.
Just real quick, and I don't even want to drill down on the whole coffee topic at all. I think the point with innovation and sustainably driven innovation is, in general, we have to realize what the current living situation is. Would it be more sustainable if everybody from now to then would start to ride bikes and bikes only, and we completely abandon cars? That's what you just mentioned. Yes, probably would be, but it's just not. It's just not really an option, now, is it? And coffee might be a good example because the water consumption is a bit high. But I think if we try to make an effort into producing a product that will be consumed, as a matter of fact, in a more sustainable way, I think that is a valuable input that well, we as a company and also myself as a consumer can actually deliver. Besides the fact that you could completely abandon products that have been in our culture in Germany, for instance, at once, the impact would be a completely different one. So I think idealism has its value in the whole sustainability discussion, but it needs to appreciate the current situations that are a given and realize in which boundaries I can have an impact and influence.
So, first of all, thank you for the diverse input today. This was really brilliant. But I want to come back to one question, and this all goes around innovation. And we had this exercise in the beginning where everyone wrote down a word and tried to define innovation. So, as a question for the panel, if we take it to the next level, and based on your experience, how would you define innovative competence? Because this would be something which we can all adapt to get started with. So,
In one word.
maybe rephrase innovative competence. So, when you work with people, how do you recognize if they are ready to change something, and how good they are? So, where would you put the focus on? Where to get started with?
I think you first need to understand that if you're solving someone's problem. I think that is many times people come up with solutions, but they don't always think if it's actually solving someone's problem. And I think that is, let's say, human-centered design is all about that, is that you actually talk to the user and understand what they need. Because I think, and I see this, and I've also worked in corporate projects where we worked on a big project, and then you bring it to your, maybe it's even you're solving a problem for your colleague, and the money was spent, research was spent, time was spent on solving, creating something, but you didn't speak to the user to understand if you're actually addressing their needs. You create something, it has all kinds of specifications, but then you bring it to the person who actually needs to use it on a day-to-day basis, and they're like, wait, you gave me A, B, C, but I need actually X, Y, Z. And I think that's, you always need I think innovation comes if you're actually solving a problem. And I think it's very basic, but that's to me the start of it.
So we have time for 2 more questions, okay?
So she was also waiting. Sorry? Would you like to have a look?
Yes.
She raises so many times.
There was a point on developing countries and developed countries and education. So I would rather, I think, like to Robert and Hila, but of course any input is welcome. So I think maybe it's just me, but the feeling I have that in developed country, when we decide to buy something sustainable, or when I'm forced to think about sustainability, there's also something very sad coming with it. It's just like I'm forcing myself to think about the apocalypse every day and think like, if I don't buy the good and sustainable things, I'm contributing to the end of the world. Well, what I experience in developing countries is that where there's no access to better services or no services, there's the opportunity to really match innovation and sustainability. In the sense, there's no innovation if it's not sustainable. As an example, access to energy is just like it's not feasible, or it's cheaper to provide solar panels to people that live off the grid than actually fuel-based, grid-based solutions.
So what I've been thinking about it, it's a personal thought, but I would really like to see what you think about it, is like, how do we do this is like in developed countries, where there's not just like this good and bad, there's just like innovation with sustainability. Anything that comes as new is not a good and bad version of it, but there's just like blending this innovation and sustainability in the sense that the new thing that comes, I already know that it's thinking sustainability inside, you know? And how would you implement such a thing, since this is also about innovation? How do we go there, and how do we learn from developing countries rather than, you know, imposing our version?
That's an evening subject in itself, I think.
Questions?
Maybe 3 lines. I think developing countries will possibly skip some of the products that we had, like they went from straight to mobile phones rather than having landlines. And so they may skip some of the mistakes that we currently now know as a mistake, with a bit of luck. The other thing is, I think in developed countries, we shouldn't really call them those 2 ranges. I think there's now 7 levels or 5 levels. We should be using the correct one, but I can't remember what they are. But you know, we're level 1. In level 1 countries, we have the opportunity with our wallets to support new technologies. So we can innovate by what we buy and purchase. So solar panels are the cheapest form of electricity generation now in most of the world, because lots and lots of Germans and the German government subsidized solar for a very long time. Sadly, the Chinese then made all the money out of it, but that's not the point. So I think voting with our wallets and being prepared to try new things. So there's a huge range of vegan burgers now. I've been trying them all. Some of them are really nice. And that will just encourage that. And I don't feel bad about trying it. I get really excited when it's good. You know, I did something ridiculous. I bought an electric car, which I totally ridiculous, but anyway, to show basically what my friends persuaded. And that's really exciting. And seeing how much fun it is to drive an electric car makes me realise, actually, it's going to be quite easy to persuade everyone to switch to an electric car. And that's exciting too. So I don't feel bad about trying new products. I don't think we should feel guilty about it. I think we should actually see that by adopting these new technologies, these lower carbon options, we're actually helping those technologies to become lower cost. That's the reason I bought the electric car. That's what I keep telling myself. And they will become cheaper, and then most of us will use them. And I'm also trying to car share it, which is actually really difficult. But that's another form of innovation. We need to sort of think about how we share infrastructure, rather than every one of us buying a car that sits around for 98% of the time anyway. So that was a few little thoughts on a very broad subject. They don't feel guilty about innovating when it comes to products in this area. Consuming them,
Going back to your point on how you can have sustainability embedded in these new innovative solutions, I think it is key, this exchange that you mentioned, so, because there's good innovation and bad innovation as well. So you're solving a problem, and you can solve it, but in a very poor manner, for example, or creating a lot of problems that you don't thought even as a consequence of the first idea. So if you have a successful idea in a developing area, as Roy mentioned, leapfrogging all the mistakes that were made here, and then having that exchange in terms of, okay, we found this solution in a developing country that can work here, or we made these mistakes, don't do them. But I think also awareness is a key here. The more people you have thinking and considering sustainability, then innovation will come up with that in place already. Because people, the more they think about it, the more they are considering their impact and the decisions they're making, how they see the world. I think that will come in the innovation process already.
So last question.
So this is actually not a question, but a point that I make, and I would also like to hear if you keep this idea. Actually, we are talking about this money thing and capitalism, but we are always missing the important part, how the money is created, and how many people know is here that how money is created out of thin air. Actually, there are some numbers in the bank. And if we all run to the banks and demand our money, they can't because there is no money here. There is like 10% of the physical money is there, but the others are not there. So we always need to feel that missing money, and so someone has to be bankrupt and stay hungry. So we need to fix that first, which is a really fundamental thing, and then we can talk about like then we can solve this pressure on us and stop being greedy, because actually naturally humans are not greedy and selfish. This pressure is making us selfish and greedy. So that's my point.
Anyone wants to answer that? What's the question?
It's a very good point. What drives this obsession to accumulate material goods? Yeah, and it's interesting that asylum seekers who've lost everything tend to have an overdeveloped sense that they need to, everything that's given to them, they hoard it, even though they don't need the 7th pound on the 6th bicycle that they've been donated. And I think if you've lost everything, you tend to want to accumulate. And I think there is this sense of fear of not having enough. And maybe that does drive greed. That's an interesting point. How we get rid of that sense of fear, I don't know, but I think that's heading into the idea of a universal basic income. If one never be in a position where one's going to starve, then one would never feel the need to accumulate.